we felt like there wasn't a record like this out there, at least that we could listen to. So we were like, why not just make it?
I'm here with the wonderful Isaac Faulk of Blood Incantation. I see that you've got your Battlefield Earth kind of. You got the memo. How are you, man?
I'm doing good, man. Yeah. How are you?
Yeah, all good, man. It's nice to see you again. I know that we saw each other briefly in your other guys, which I mean, you have so many, man. It's hard to keep up.
Yeah, the last time we saw each other in London with Wayfair and Enslaved, which was a great time. But yeah, getting ready for this next thing, the new Blood Incantation album and the shows and touring coming up.
Yeah, man. It's I guess I sort of moving on to the next thing. Wow, like holy shit, man. Like, yeah, I remember, I think you mentioned when we were in, the dressing room, just kind of like wait for it. And I was like, wow, okay, cool. It's lived up to the hype for sure.
Awesome. That's
It's
great to hear because yeah, when we're going into it, we're to us, obviously it feels a lot of the stuff feels natural to us. But after doing it and then showing it to our friends and people are like, oh wow, this is gonna be pretty interesting for people to digest. And so now, getting other people to hear it, it's been great. I can't wait for it to come out. So
I guess take me back to the moment where, Absolute Elsewhere started to take shape. Was that kind of like an easy sort of thing to get started or?
yeah, I mean, obviously we gotta kind of go back to after Hidden History and of the human race and kind of going into COVID and us having the idea of an ambient record for a long time. Um, I mean, Paul and I had been talking about making ambient music since we started the band. And so Timewave Zero was a really natural thing for us. But that's a really important part of the story, I think, because Timewave Zero allowed us to basically bridge from Hidden History, where we thought we had kind of settled on what the band had sought out to do with like technical progressive death metal, whatever you want to call it. And we felt like, okay, let's put a capstone on that and let's do something, expand our repertoire a little bit, expand our vocabulary, and make this record Timewave Zero, which obviously was divisive and it's its own thing, But that really allowed us to come to the next thing with like a fresh idea, fresh mind. And then for us, I'll say this a million times probably now, but it's really important for Blood Incantation not to repeat ourselves. And that's really like a big part of our ethos as a band is just let's push forward and like, obviously bring parts of what make Blood Incantation what it is, but we just really want to make sure that we're doing something new that excites us every time. So around the same time, I had finished writing and recording the Stormkeep record from the time, Tales of Other Time. So it was like just kind of a blank slate of like, okay, we're here. And I started working on the first half of the record, the Stargate. And it was just like the first time that I had written Blood Incantation riffs in, I want to say a couple, 2 years, something like that. And it started just kind of coming together. And that was during that, intermediate COVID time. I think we had started kind of getting, okay, now shows are maybe going to start happening again. And then there was just that idea of like, well, I want, whatever we do next it has to be something bigger and it has to be something, it has to expand on what we've already been doing. And so just as the material started forming, it just made a lot of sense. Like, hey, let's do two sides of this record and let's do something like total prog style. Obviously really influenced by stuff like Yes and Topographic Oceans and like King Crimson and stuff like that, but also stuff like Crimson by Edge of Sanity, stuff like Anesthetized by Porcupine Tree, tracks like that, and just this like idea of doing these epic songs, and which we had already been doing live, and of course Awakening from uh, the Hidden History record,
Yeah.
and doing Vitrifications Part One and Two, doing those together live. We had already been doing these kind of like larger pieces in the live settings. So we're like, let's just do that in the metal way that we just did with Timewave Zero. Let's do that in a metal way. And so yeah, it just started coming together in that way.
Yeah, man. I think that's the thing, isn't it? That I feel like sometimes maybe people didn't quite understand the purpose of Timewave Zero in that it was cracking open that door so that when you guys come back in and you bust it open, it's not as much of a surprise. But obviously, like having spoken to you, Paul, like I kind of understand that you guys are, you're just open to music. It doesn't necessarily have to be death metal. It doesn't have to be any particular kind of thing. It's just any one sort of idea of whatever you might want to incorporate, right?
Absolutely. I mean, to us, Blood Incantation is just a band. Like it doesn't have to be this specific thing, although the vocabulary and the essence and the vibe of what Blood Incantation is very specific, obviously. Like there's like a very clear aesthetic, a very clear the lyrics are very specific, but that repertoire and that palette, let's just say, is a wide thing. And we share a lot of interests. And I think that's what's cool about that group of people in that band is that each of us has a unique fandom, I guess, or interest when it comes to music or whatever. But there's a great Venn diagram of a lot of different things, but there's that one spot where we all meet in the middle. And so that's what Blood Incantation is. And that's why every time we do something, it's like, well, let's just expand into more of those things, psychedelic rock, progressive rock, cosmic music, ambient music, world music, new age, like any of this stuff that you could tag or whatever. But ultimately, we're like, why can't Blood Incantation be all those things?
Dovetailing off the back of that, obviously one of the biggest things is the cosmic music and all that sort of stuff. Like, I feel like, it was almost destined that you guys would record at Hansa Studios, It's almost like another member of the band in some ways, just for this record.
Absolutely. No, I would completely agree with that statement, and also just say that it's almost like the worlds collided, or the stars aligned for us, because everything in that summer last year, it just all came together specifically for this record, and it just felt very cosmic. It felt very, it just felt like all these coincidences and all these things just coming together. And we were just very fortunate that not only did we have people like Arthur, who even came up with that idea to just offer that to us, but we're very fortunate to have people in Century Media that believe in the band enough for us to tell them a crazy idea like that, and they roll with it.
Do you think that because I would imagine you guys probably have quite a lot of material already written before you go into the studio, but like, were there any sort of things that were kind of influenced by where you were, the fact that you were in Germany, in Berlin, and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we had a lot of stuff. I mean, basically the album was mostly written before we even went to Germany, and then we had a week in Noisy Rooms, which is the practice space in Berlin. It's in kind of like the art district, and we were able to hang out there for a week and just kind of like absorb the city. And that's really where we finalized a lot of stuff, like tempos and just like how many times we play certain things and stuff like that. Um, but we did leave some stuff open, particularly with some of our guest musicians, specifically Nicholas from Halos and Thorsten from Tangerine Dream. And we did not know that Thorsten was going to be involved even when we were in Berlin. We had no, I mean, this other Nicholas Chakowski, who was working with Century Media at the time, he had suggested, oh, maybe I'll hit up Thorsten. And we were like, okay, crazy idea, but I'm sure that won't happen. But you never know, it's like in the world of Blood Incantation now, it's just like, why not try,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, but with Nicholas from Halos, we had been talking to him, so we knew he was going to come. So there were some of these parts that we were like, okay, we know that this goes this amount of times, but we don't know. Maybe there's going to be a synth solo. Maybe there's going to be a Hammond organ. Maybe there's going to be this and that. So we left a lot of that open, and I think that creative space, just being in this studio and having the time. I mean, that's a huge part of it. We didn't have that much time for any of our. I mean, this is this like I think Starspawn we recorded and mixed in 5 days or something like that. It was like
I mean,
so like getting to an album where it's like we had a week of pre-production and then 3 weeks in the studio. It's like that's even before mixing and mastering. So
yeah, wow.
you just really had the time to just like, okay, hey, today only vocals. Nobody else come to the studio, like stuff like that, where we really didn't have that before. And I think that allowed us to take the time for each thing, and that also allowed those contributors to like dig in. And this allowed us to be like, okay, Nicholas from Hate Lost, you've got 3 days, and we're just gonna it's just you for 3 days, and like that type of thing. So that was very, I mean, that just allowed for so much creativity, I think.
Wow, that's amazing. So you even had all that time for your guests as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And well, Thorsten, he did a lot of his stuff at his own studio. So he had, I mean, he came in, listened to the record, what we had so far, and we had this spot where we're like, hey, we have this ambient bit. But we're kind of, that could be a spot where you could do stuff. I don't, whatever you think. And he kind of listened to it, and we all kind of thought he didn't like it at first because he's just very, very stoic German guy. Um, and then he finishes listening to it, and he's like, starts explaining the album to us. He's like, oh yeah, you did this 5/4 part. It goes from a D to a G, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I think I know what part you're talking about. We never talk about our music that way. Um, and he's like, yeah, I think I can do something during that part. So we're like, okay, like I guess we'll find out. And I think it was a week later we went over to his studio, which is in Berlin, and it's just this old barber shop that he's converted. And there's just like 100 synthesizers and Vincent Van Gogh paintings on every wall. And we go in, and he shows us this part, and he does this live thing, which is now on the record. And he did this delay thing, and we're watching him do it, and we're all like kind of dumbfounded, like, oh my God, this is going to be on our record. Like, holy moly. And so, yeah, it was stuff like that where it was just like these coincidental, just kind of cosmic moments in the making of the record that we didn't even know that was going to be on the record going into Berlin, but here we are.
That sort of leads nicely into some of the ideas that I kind of have extrapolated from the lyrics of Absolute Elsewhere and stuff. And it seems like it's quite even the fact that there's like a side A, a side B, it's sort of like this yin and yang feel. And I feel like you're kind of opening up a philosophical question of being part of a larger whole, and the idea of destiny, and like being you're master of your own destiny, if you know what I mean. Is that kind of on the
Yeah,
right sort of?
yeah. I mean, obviously, Paul is the master of the lyrics, and he's always got an idea. But I think he always starts talking to us about it first. And obviously, when I write a song and me and him talk about it, I kind of like I have an idea of like the title, stuff like that, and like where it's going. But then he takes the lyrics in his own direction. But yeah, I would say, for example, like you said, like the A side is kind of like a classic Blood Incantation song in that way that it's like got this sci-fi Stargate, this other thing, which is classic for us, but I think it's expanded on, and that's kind of like how we saw it, as like this is the most Blood Incantation song that we've made yet.
Yeah.
And then the message is taking it to a different place. And I think that was kind of the idea, is like take where we've gone as far as it would go, and even expand on it, but then really do something new and different on the B side, while still obviously being the same band, same album, that sort of thing. And that's why, when we were first working on the record, like I was like, okay, this song, like what the song I was working on, I was like, this is the Stargate. I think, maybe it's on the nose, but that feels like where we're at. It's like we're going so crazy with the music, but the title and the lyrics should be like really like this is Blood Incantation. This is what it's about. And then I remember Paul coming to practice and being like, I have an idea for the B-side song. If you just call it The Message. And I was like, that's perfect. Just, yeah, that's it. Because it really does, it feels bigger. Like it feels like, it's like, for example, on Hidden History of the Human Race, you had Awakening from the Dream of Existence. Yeah,
Yeah.
the whole thing. And I think that having that long title, it's like, that's its own statement of like, okay, it's just like crazy, more is more, larger than life, but it's almost more larger than life to just be like the Stargate, the
Yeah.
message. So, and again, like not repeating ourselves. That's kind of like a big thing. Is just like, okay, we did this. Now let's do the opposite. And so, I know for him doing the lyrics, they're even more, I think, personal, and I think they're even more. What I would say is like introspective and more and less about being like, oh, we're going to talk about kind of these trappings of science fiction and to talk about stuff inside being a human being. Instead of, it's just circumnavigating that and just going straight to the core, which I think is where the music is coming from too. It's like less about being like, hey, we're doing this sci-fi space music. It's more like, hey, we're doing this like what's more cosmic than the mind, the human being a human being. It's a crazy, trippy, weird world out here, and I think looking at it from that direction, it's like that's why the music is so intense in both directions. It can be very beautiful, it can be very brutal, it can be very sad, it can be very energetic and epic. And I think that's just tapping into what the human experience is. It's not one thing, and I think that's why we all gravitate towards these bands that are multicolored, because why not expand on that whole human experience?
Yeah, man, for sure. I think, it's similar to what you just mentioned, like you can distill the message, for for lack of a better word, of a song with a title like The Message. It's a kind of quite open-ended and but like open to interpretation, which I think that song is.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think when I hear the lyrics on the tracks too, I often it's fun for me not to know the lyrics perfectly, because I hear them in the song almost organically, like the listener would. And I think that's and then like when you're sitting with a record that you love, it doesn't matter what it is, but you pull out the lyric sheet and you're like looking at the art and you look at the lyric sheet, and then you're just kind of, oh, and then like sometimes like a sentence will like hit you. And I always love that experience of like there's a moment on a record where like you read a lyric and you're like, oh, huh,
Yeah.
what are they, what is that about? What is the,
Yeah.
and I feel like that's just, I like to have that own my experience with our music that way too. So it's always fun for me to finally hear the what he's been doing, because like we'll write the music, and oftentimes he won't even have the lyrics done until he's in the studio. So that, I think he had more done before the studio this time, but it's always fun for me, and I know for all of us to, you know, we're not allowed in the studio when he's working on the vocals, and then we come in and then we get to hear something. It's like, oh, okay, interesting. Wow, what's that about? Um, but yeah, no, and it was important for us to not just be, and obviously that's been true for, I think, our career, but I think even more now for the lyrics not to just be like regular metal lyrics, of
Yeah.
like, oh, like aliens, chest bursting, lasers, people dying, I don't
Yeah.
know, skull stuff. Like it was more about like being like, okay, what is the psychedelic cosmic idea behind each of these things, and what can we say as a band that's like positive too? Like I think that's something that not I'm not talking down on any of this, because I love a lot of records where it's just like demons and wizards and whatever. Like some of my bands are kind of like that too.
Yeah.
But but I think it was important for us too to like hit on something that's true to people and also have a positive message too, because there's already so much messed up in the world. There's already so much that we can be stressed out about. To us, it's like, what can we do as a band that's like, if people are going to listen to our music, what do you say to them? And I think it's more important now than ever to like say something positive.
Once it falls into an atmosphere like ours, the seeds germinate and the eggs grow.
There's a huge amount of light in the message as well that I noticed, like all of the melodies, all of the note choices, they're very kind of vibrant and bright.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, even talking about that, like I would say, you know, on the Stargate, like for example, there is the part where I brought that to the band and I was like, is this maybe too happy, too something? I don't know, we can change it. And they were like, no, 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 this is great. And then I think that having that already on the A side, it was like on the B side, it was like, well, now we're free. It's like, why not just incorporate these other things? And I think that positive vibe, actually a band that we're really inspired by is this band Lykathea Flame.
Oh,
And
wow.
they're I don't know if you know the band, but just like super brutal, but super positive. Like super, it's like very beautiful music.
Yeah.
It's got these major chords, but it's like got gravity blasts on that type of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was always really interesting to us because it was, you can be a brutal band and be like positive sounding and be beautiful and light and like you said, full of light. And I think that's that like that yin and yang thing that you were talking about. It's like the Stargate has these like really intense, like brooding metal parts, and then you get to the message and there's still brutal parts, but then it goes into these really epic, beautiful things that for us, it's like some of my favorite parts of the record where it almost like feels like you're opening into this new world
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah, I think is it Elviniferous or something like that, that
Yeah,
album? Yeah, that's amazing record, man. It's like
absolutely.
the light version of Gorguts' Obscura.
Totally, yeah. It's like Cryptopsy or Gorguts, like, but like a new age record with or something. That's what's and that like that we've been. I mean, we've been into that band since. I mean, even since the early days. I think we would kind of reference them, but I think even more on the message, it like feels very apt.
Yeah, for sure. So I also wanted to talk about the artwork because like I mean the artwork's always been incredible on your records, but like wow, this this one takes the cake. I think it's amazing. Like
Oh,
it
awesome.
I love the way that it just kind of does really create that sort of I don't know, it is like it's somewhere, but it's also nowhere at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's something about the music. I think too, where it's like familiar yet alien. I think that's kind of where we're coming from. And so the artist Steve Ardad, he is this classic sci-fi artist from back in the 70s, much like what we've used in our past records. But this is our first time using commissioned, like fully commissioned art that was designed for Blood Incantation. So this is the first time we've done that. We had always pulled stuff and with the getting the okay from the artist, but we had always pulled already created art.
Yeah.
And so this was our first time like, okay, we need to get something that's like this is Blood Incantation. And we had, we've always kind of used pyramids on stuff, but we were like, needs to have a pyramid on it. That's like a big thing. But we started talking to Steve Ardad, and he actually doesn't have internet access. He doesn't have a phone. He lives in Kentucky, and the only way to get a hold of him is through his sister. And so we had to email his sister, get his address. We found that through the guy who runs the sci-fi art page on Instagram and Twitter. And so we got his info.
No way.
because he's one of these guys from back in the day that still paints. He still makes new stuff, and he still does it the same way he's always done it. He's not doing it digitally, or anything like that. And so we got his info, and Paul made this whole package. He made a handwritten letter with a demo tape of the new stuff, and this was before we recorded it. And I think he put Timewave Zero and our old records in there, so it had like kind of a history of the art, and the music, and it's kind of like, hey, this is what the band's about. And he was really kind and really and responded to us and was like, yes, I am absolutely willing to do this. And he made and yeah, he sent us like a rough of it, and then the first thing that he sent of like just the painting itself, we're like, this is perfect. And he did the whole back cover and the insert of what the gatefold is going to be too, which is also very sick. And it just, to us, it was like, yeah, it has to be that blending of like that sci-fi art, the space and all that stuff, but the kind of classic prog records like that we love and all that stuff. But it's also very Blood Incantation, I think, at the same time. So yeah, we were very lucky and just fortunate that he was willing to do that. Yeah, very
Right.
very stoked on.
I mean, it's pretty insane. Like, there's moments on there where, it goes from, like you say, King Crimson, sort of 1973 prog to, to like full on death metal, which is it's quite a curveball.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's cool to hear from people like you who I've, we've known each other for a minute, and hearing you talk about the record, because like we've been sitting on it for a year now, and over a year, and so it's crazy for people finally to hear it, and getting the reactions. It's been really cool because sometimes you make something and you're like, I don't know, is it good? I can't remember. So it's cool yeah, I'm just excited for people to hear it because it is something new. It's something different. I think a lot of people are gonna have feelings about it one way or the other, but what is great about, I think, where we're at as a band is like having made Timewave Zero, and that freedom of just like, we're not doing at the end of the day, if anyone can take anything away from it, it's like we're not doing anything for anyone other than ourselves. Like we just like this type of music, and we felt like there wasn't a record like this out there, at least that we could listen to. So we were like, why not just make it?
Yeah. But that's the way it should be, man. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, you are presenting your art, you're bearing your soul to everyone else, essentially, musically. And it should reflect everything that is about, individuals, but also the kind of the group of Blood Incantation as a whole, right?
Yeah, and I say this a lot too, but Blood Incantation is a unique band, even for us, because it's one of those bands, one of the few bands I've ever been in, where it is a very much a democracy. It's a collective, and it's not one person's band. And so even for me to be interviewed or whoever, it's like we're always a group, and we're always making decisions as a group. So it's like, it doesn't matter who wrote the riff, it's going to the band, and if it's not good enough, it's not good enough, and it has to fit, and it has to be part of the thing. But with Blood Incantation, it's like every piece is like meticulously by every member, like, zeroed in on. So it is, but I do think it benefits from that. And I think it also, you get something very unique that way, because, you listen to like, and I even love some of these bands, like a one-man band sort of band. It can be very one-dimensional, I think,
Yeah.
sometimes, even if it's really good. But when you have all these different elements coming in together, I think of bands like the Beatles or Pink Floyd or something like that, and then I just think of these different people in that band that like clearly that band would not have been the same without them. Even if it's somebody like Ringo, it's like or Rick Wright or someone like that, where it's like they don't get the sunshine all the time, but it's like if you took that person out of that band, that is not the same band now. And I think that's obviously Blood Incantation is Blood Incantation. We're on our own, not nearly as important as these other things, but but you know, I think at least personality wise, I feel like we are similar in that way of just being like, that's how we work. And it only is Blood Incantation because it's those four people, you know, it's like you've got, um, if you took one of them out, it just wouldn't be the same. And that's why Timewave Zero to me, that is a Blood Incantation record. It's those four people. And that's one of our most collaborative things we've ever done. And so coming out of that and doing this record, it's like we had that spirit of collaboration, that spirit of those four people all having the footprint, you know, their fingerprint on the record. And it just, I think it's unique because of that.
Obviously, you know, the Stargate is kind of like, let's say, for lack of a better word, your baby. You know, you kind of like were the main sort of songwriter behind it. So what does the Stargate represent for you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, going into it already, that was the title in my mind. I thought, you know, this is something that we had talked about. The Stargate and gateways, that's always been like an idea in Blood Incantation. And that's something that Paul and I always talk about is, you know, no death is known. You are the Stargate, you know, like, that's on our first record. And we've used that a lot. And also, um, you know, just thinking of like the Stargate is not this science fiction thing. It's more of like a metaphysical thing. It's more like, what, you know, that inner space versus outer space concept of like, there is this infinite world within you that I think we're taught not to tap into because the established society at large prefers us to be physical consumer kind of beings. And I think that's where we've kind of gotten to in this type of society, is just being non metaphysical, non-spiritual beings, you know, even though obviously there's another thing there, which is our spiritual lives are controlled by another sect of people. That it's like you can only get to that infinite through a specific person, like a, you know, let's just say a priest or someone like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's that idea is like we have the tools to open our own Stargate, our own worldview, our own inner self can be seen. And I think that, like, you know, there's a lot to be said, to me at least, for music being that Stargate, being that kind of meditation. I think of music and playing music and performing and writing it as a spiritual endeavor. And I think, you know, the four of us, I think that's kind of where we come to it. And it sounds maybe kind of like, I don't know, over maybe pompous, or I don't know, it's like self-indulgent, but it, you know, because like I think sometimes I think of music and I'm like, oh, this is so trivial and so silly, to take it so seriously. But I think that's the dichotomy, and like that's the yin and yang. It's like you can, it's like you're singing a little song, you know, it's like a little thing, but at the same time, it's when you're at a performance, you're at a concert, and you're kind of in that world, you're taken somewhere else, and you're living outside of that physical, that regular everyday life. And I think that's also part of why, like, you know, Paul and I talk about this all the time, is like how much it's just sad. It's sad, and it's frustrating at times when people have like their phones at the show. And I totally get like taking like a little snippet, but for example, I just feel like that takes you out of that experience, you know, that takes you out of that feeling of like that oneness with, you know, you're in the audience and there's this performer, and you can be in that symbiotic relationship that transcends your everyday, right? But we kind of get, I feel like also at the same time, obviously there's just so much content, there's so many shows to go to, there's so many things to do, and I think we get kind of overloaded with that. And I think the specialness, you know, there was like a moment, I remember this very distinctly, right out of COVID, and the feeling that people had towards concerts again in that moment, where it was like it had been taken away, and now having that specialness was very powerful, I think. And people really, they were like, wow, I can't take this for granted. And now we're back again to like people just being like, oh, whatever, you know. it's just another thing. And I think it's just interesting to see that people, and so people kind of start to just take it for granted, just kind of be like, okay, this is just that same thing.
Yeah.
But what I find too is when I have that moment, when there is an artist and there is somebody that I see, and as a jaded 35-year-old musician who's seen a lot of shows, not even that old. It's like, but it's like I feel like at this point I've just seen a lot of stuff, but there are still those moments where I'm like, wow, like I'm taken aback, and I feel like I'm part of something, or I feel like I just discovered something new.
Yeah.
That feeling is something that I always hold on to. So to me, the Stargate is all about just being like, that is always open to us at all times. Like it's always there, and we have the choice to open up to it if we want to. And obviously it's that everyday life thing. It just really makes it harder sometimes to feel that way, but it's always there.
Yeah, man. It's very interesting. There's another sort of like philosophical kind of idea is a friend of mine was telling me that the idea of genius is not it's not like one particular person. It's almost like an entity that visits different people over time.
Mm.
And I was wondering, like, what do you kind of make of that sort of idea that genius isn't necessarily like something that one particular person has, but because it kind of taps into that world you were talking about, that sort of like, I don't know, have you seen Soul?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
When he's like shredding away on the flute or
Yeah.
whatever it is, and then he transcends into that sort of world, and it's like something
Mm.
else. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, no, actually I totally agree with that idea. Well, and I also agree. So I've heard a lot of people talk about it that way. I've heard people talk about, for example, the muse or something where it's like you're not writing it, there's something else tapping into you. And I think the best stuff that people make, and I would say for myself, and I would probably say the other guys agree, is like when you hone into something it's like it's almost like Alan Watts talks about this a lot, where it's like this Zen moment where it's like your brain is not thinking about it. Like I think a lot of musicians who, especially like improvisational musicians, which I'm not the greatest at, but people who are really good at that, they'll talk about that all the time, where it's like, yeah, your brain just like shuts off. Where that is for me is like when we're writing and you get into that mode of creating a piece of music, when I know that it's something good is when I don't, so like when you have to think about it too much and you're like, well, why is this riff happening? Oh, it doesn't feel right here, whatever that. Just stop. That's just not. That's not the. Sometimes there are songs where it's like you have to get through it, but the best stuff is always where it's like, yeah, you turn off, you're connected to something else, and then you kind of come out of it and you're like, okay, it doesn't even. I'm like, where is that even from? It's like sometimes you're like, oh, maybe that's a reference to some other artist I heard one time, but it starts to feel even more you. And I think if you turn yourself off, it's more genuine. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to get to the genius thing, I also think I also have heard people talk about that. It's like, yeah, like I feel like when people talk about genius, I feel like it's really more about there's like a cosmic set of circumstances and people and the right time, the right place, the right things all came together for this thing to happen. And we look back on it and we're like, wow, that was like this work of genius or something. But it's almost more like that was just the moment at which the preparation and the circumstance and maybe just some luck
Yeah.
just all came in together. And there was something, and there was like a zeitgeist at the time of people talking about that thing, and it all just sort of comes together, and you see it, like even some of my favorite artists, it's like like, I don't know, I'm a huge fan of Steven Wilson and Porcupine Tree, and I always hear him talking in interviews where it's funny because I have my own preferences for his music, but it's interesting hearing him talk about it sometimes too, where he's like, yeah, and then there was this album and it just wasn't, just didn't feel right at that time, or something. And it's interesting hearing him talk about that because, you always think, oh, whatever the next thing is going to be my best thing. But sometimes it's just the things don't align that way, or it's just not, it wasn't coming from that place. Maybe it was a record deal or something. And like a lot of bands talk about that. It was like, oh, we had to fulfill this thing. Sometimes that's the one that you're like, holy shit, that's the album because they had to make something and they wrote a song in 20 seconds. And it's just, it's really interesting how you hear different artists talk about their own work. And I feel some people will be like, I'm a genius, I'm a genius, I'm this and that. But I just feel like that I never buy it because I'm like, well, if you believe that you made it, if you believe that you already did it, then why would you even keep making music? Like I feel like to me, part of what excites me is that I didn't get it right. It's like sometimes I feel like even on the new record, I think there are things I'm like, oh, I would do that better next time. I would do this differently next time. But and actually Paul and I were just talking about that like a week ago. We were listening to it and I was like, yeah, I would do this differently. And I was like, yeah, that's why we have to make another album. The imperfections are what drive it. The imperfections are what keep me going to it. If everything was right all the time, there wouldn't be that struggle and that, trying to find something. And I think that's really the most exciting part to me about being in a band is like, we all have a different idea and we all have an idea of like what we're trying to get to. And it's almost like there's this, I don't know, like bubble in the sky that we're all trying to look at and we're all like describing it differently to each other. And like, I see different colors and he sees different colors. And so we're trying to recreate that bubble together. And now it turns into something totally not like what that thing is that we saw, but now it's its own unique thing. It's its own like special, and it's just us.
Yeah, man. Well, I have to say, the spirit of genius is definitely like lingering on you guys, I think, for a little bit.
Well, I appreciate that.
Man, like Absolute Elsewhere is just absolutely world class. I'm a huge Opeth fan, so I think the only thing that's potentially gunning for the album of the year is Between These Two, but I haven't heard that record. So like, but yeah, it's unbelievable, man. Like, just
the fact. I mean, just because you brought it up, that new Opeth track just dropped like what was the last week or whatever, and the fact that they have death metal vocals, we were all like, oh, like us, we were like, Opeth doesn't do this anymore. Opeth isn't a death metal band anymore, and now they are, which is hilarious because their album comes out like a week after ours does. So, hey, I mean, I don't know if Mikkel has heard our band. I'm a huge fan. I've been a huge fan for a while, since I was a kid. I mean, I was like, I want to say I was 14 when I first heard him, and I've been a fan since I was probably 16, and I since Ghost Reveries came out until today, I've been a huge fan. And so to me, for them to do a death metal record again is like a huge deal. So it is really funny to, like, I mean, that was a reference every time we would talk to our label and different people, our management and stuff. We would always reference Ghost Reveries as like basically the only other thing that I can think of that does progressive death metal the way that much death metal and that much progressive as what we're trying to do. Obviously, the types of progressive and the types of death metal we're doing, I think, is different. But absolutely, I think we're doing something that is unique. And with that as a lightning rod.
Well, dude, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a chat.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thanks, Tristan. It's always great talking to you. I'm sure we'll see each other in London, if not sooner than that. But we will be coming out there next spring. So
yeah, man, I'll be there with cosmic bells on.
Absolutely. No, we're super stoked and looking forward to it, man. Thank you.